I want to talk about this because it's really driving me crazy. I hate the constant negativity on social media all the time. I came across this guy, Anthony something or other. He calls himself the internet's biggest music nerd. I came across this guy and I watched a couple of his videos and I was blown away. I was like, wow, this guy's great. He reviews albums and things like that. I watched 3 or 4 videos so much. They was so good that I literally followed him on Twitter and I wrote him a message. I was like, I would love to, have you on the show, do something with you. I think your videos are awesome. That was like 3 or 4 days ago. I'm totally over it. This guy, he put out a video that was 3 problems with the premise behind the new movie yesterday. This is the movie we talked about with the Beatles, where some metaphysical cosmic thing happens. There's a blackout all across the world. This guy gets hit by a bus simultaneously at the same time, wakes up. His friend gives him a guitar as a get well better gift. And he starts playing Yesterday on it, and they're blown away. They're like, oh, my God. And he quickly discovers that he now lives in a world where the Beatles don't exist. And he remembers and knows all their music. By the way, he's a struggling musician. And now he's faced with this struggle between, do I play and perform this music as my own, or do I not? A little bit of a moral dilemma there for the movie. As soon as I saw this trailer, I put it out there. You, the morning show, the Anthony audience, gobbled it up, loved it, right? Unbelievable idea. I'm sitting here going, most creative thing I've ever heard of. Like, what a great way to reinvent the Beatlemania thing and reintroduce it to a new audience, and what a concept and all this great stuff. And I'm just lauding and falling head over heels over the people behind this film. And here comes this guy, and he's puts out a video, 3 problems with yesterday's premise. Like, it shouldn't surprise me, but we could never just be happy. Just go along. Okay. It's like there are people that exist in this world, and clearly this guy is one of them, where they look and go, oh, everybody really seems to be enjoying this. How could I dump all over it? And I don't understand why these people exist, but there seem to be a lot of them, and they seem to be doing really well in the internet era. They really seem to be doing super, super well. Let's take a listen to some of Anthony's premises.
Hey, everyone. Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, most flickery music nerd. I hope you're doing well, and it is time for a quick thought piece video where I will be talking about 3 reasons that I think the concept of this new Yesterday film, just based on the trailer alone, makes absolutely no sense. First, before
I just the attitude and the ego just absolutely makes no sense. Like, it's a movie, okay? It's a movie. I once saw a movie where a guy took a mosquito and remade dinosaurs, right? That was like one of the biggest box office hits, lauded, critical, acclaimed films of Steven Spielberg's imagination of all time. Guy took a mosquito and remade dinosaurs. It's a movie. It's a movie. We don't have to nitpick and negative everything, do we?
Been lit up a little bit for the past 24 hours because there's been a lot of discussion about this new movie that has just been teased. Should be dropping later this year. It's titled Yesterday. It's also from the director of Slumdog Millionaire. And the whole concept and the idea of this movie is that this singer-songwriter type dude basically falls off his bike, he hits his head, and he essentially wakes up in a world where nobody knows who the Beatles are, and historically, I guess they just didn't even really happen. He's Googling.
You got to see the smile on this guy's face. Like, why do some people, can people be happy? Why do some people feel the need to just tear everything down? Can't we build things up? I don't get it. drives me crazy. Drives me crazy. He's smiling at the thought of this. I saw this and thought this is probably one of the more brilliant film ideas that I've even heard of in the last 30 years. This guy hears this and goes, how silly and stupid. Why? Why are some people just so prone to negativity? Why do they always go to no first?
The Beatles and John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and nothing's coming up. And it's like, oh my God, what's going on? I'm the only person on the planet who knows who the Beatles are and knows all these songs. And so then he proceeds essentially to start playing these classic Beatles tracks, and he's stunning people with them. And then before you know it, he's the greatest songwriter the world has ever known, and he's very popular, and he's in high demand because he's such a great songwriter, and so on and so forth. And I mean, as cute as the concept looks, and this is definitely, I think, a bit of a power fantasy that a lot of people who are huge music fans have probably had at some point in time. Like if they could have woken up one day and have written all of David Bowie's songs and then been not the next David Bowie, but the David Bowie instead of David Bowie, then, you know, that would be amazing. But there are a few reasons why this whole idea just does not work at all, and I'll sort of go through those right here. The first,
aren't you dying to know why the reasons don't work? Aren't you dying to know? Because when I first saw this, I was like, I am dying to know what this guy is going to say. For the reasons why a premise of a movie, not a documentary, a movie, doesn't work. I mean, it's a movie. It's a movie. I once saw a movie where a young teenager got into a failed motor company's car and went back in time. Okay? It's a movie. It's a movie. At some point, I'm going to have to cite something that's not a Spielberg film to be taken seriously.
First reason why the concept of this movie just doesn't make
You can't keep going back to the Spielberg one.
Any sense to me is the influence of the Beatles music, because if you were really going to create a world where the Beatles had no impact and they were not there and they never occurred, they were never a thing, the current landscape would be so massively different because of how popular the Beatles were, because of the huge cultural impact that they made. I mean, at one point in the trailer, one of the singer-songwriter's friends says, it's a good song, but, you know, it's no Coldplay, so on and so forth. Like, would Coldplay even be here if not for the Beatles? I argue no, Coldplay would not be here if not for the Beatles. And
I so disagree with this sentiment. 1,000 million billion %. This is the dumbest thing that I have ever heard. So stupid. Would Coldplay be here if it wasn't for the Beatles? Just because you were influenced by a band doesn't mean there is absolutely no evidence, theoretically, that one can produce to say that B wouldn't be here if it wasn't for A. That's completely stupid and ridiculous. That is dumb. That is very, very dumb. What he's saying is if we took away the cultural impact of the Beatles, would we still have bands around? And the reason why this is dumb is because you go back to the Hollies, you go back to all the other Chuck Berry, you go back to all the other bands. There were four-piece Johnny Cash. There were four-piece bands that rock and roll was coming to way before the Beatles, way before. Now, what the Beatles did and put them in hyperdrive and made it this big, no argument. Of course, the world would be very different, but you would absolutely 1 billion % still have rock and roll bands, rock pop bands that would absolutely exist because they existed before the Beatles were around and after. If you're such a big music nerd, you would know this. But I'll tell you what this is. This is, I have to say something negative in order to get views. That's the world we live in. I honestly, in my heart of hearts, believe this guy doesn't believe what he's saying, that he sat there, watched everybody being excited and positive about this thing and thought, how can I take this down? What could I do to get views? Because that's the problem with these daily YouTube people. As somebody who does a video now every day, I see like what this world is, and there are these people and by the way, it's all over the place. They burn out. They try and make videos every day that have all, that get all these views. Like, this is what a lot of people do for a living. I'm assuming that this is what this guy does. I'm assuming that's what he does. And so they like sit there and they struggle like, oh, what can I do? I need a video today and blah, 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 blah. And they got to come up with these things, and they just start putting out stuff. And a lot of these guys wind up melting down, and they stop doing see, for me, it doesn't matter because I do the show. The vlog is just a byproduct of the show. So, it's easier for me. I could care less, I wanted the show to be good. I don't sit there going, what's my video going to be today? It's just, we put the camera on the show. It's easy for me. But these guys don't have shows, so they have to create their own thing. So they just come up with this. Like, the idea of like the Beatles not being around and Coldplay wouldn't exist is horrifically stupid. Horrifically stupid. You have the Rolling Stone. You have all these other entities around that would have inspired people. Now, would it be Coldplay specifically? I don't know. Would Chris Martin be in another band? Maybe. Would it be, Jerry Smith that made it? Who knows what it would be? But there would still be rock pop bands without the Beatles. I think I made my point on this. We'll move on to his other point.
And a lot of other musicians as well. I mean, obviously music would still exist, but what we know now as popular music would be wildly different. And it feels like the movie, just based on the trailer, doesn't really account for that in any way, shape, or form outside of just everything's exactly the same, but nobody just knows who the Beatles are. I think you could certainly make a film where you try to theorize about what the world and the world of music would be like if the Beatles had never occurred, but it seems like this movie wants to essentially have its cake and eat it too.
I love it. I love it. I love these people. The movie wants to have its cake and eat it too. What was the album review? It's driving me crazy. The album, fails to achieve what I forget what that other quote was. These critics, some of these guys, look, you either have it or you don't. You can either put an opinion to something or you can't. You can't sit there and go, this movie tries to have its cake and eat it too. It's a movie. It's a movie. Again, I saw a movie one time where two people completely switched bodies. Okay? It's a movie. A movie can do whatever it wants. And by the way, it's not a new concept. Something happening, waking up in a world where somebody or some things don't exist. That sort of thing happens all the time. Applying it to the Beatles is what makes this so super interesting. Applying it to such a huge cultural icon. I saw a show one time, right, where the Nazis won the war. And they, along with the Japanese, split up the United States of America. It's called Man in the High Castle. It's an unbelievable series. Try watching it sometime. Okay? It's a movie. It's just fun. This was supposed to be fun. It's supposed to have fun things. And the dream of like, what would the world look like? Even something as horrific as the Nazis winning, there's still something in us like, what would that look like? It's fun. It's like, oh, interesting. It's why we read books. It's why we look at paintings, right? I mean, it's art. It's culture. It's expression. You can't look at that. It's like looking at a Van Gogh painting and going, there's too many lines in this. There's a lot of lines and sun. Like, it doesn't look like, that's not what the world looks like. It's a painting. It's a painting. You know what I mean? Like, it's a paint. The movies are the same thing. It's just fun.
By erasing the Beatles completely from historical musical existence, but also just have the world that we exist in be completely exactly the same. Maybe making a stink over this issue to some music fans might seem a bit ridiculous, but imagine instead if you had a scenario in a
Seems
movie
ridiculous
where
to this guy.
All of a sudden the
That's
car
for sure.
was never invented, and we had a protagonist that was given the ability to one day wake up and invent the car. But then imagine this world, this person wakes up and looking exactly the same as the world we know it now. There are even asphalt roads and traffic signs and lights going in every direction, yet nobody somebody is driving an automobile or a bus over them. My next major issue with the premise
This is the dumbest example I've ever heard. That was the dumbest example ever. I'm not even going to spend time on that. That was so stupid. That was so stupid. I mean, I get what he's saying. Imagine a world where there wasn't a car invented. There wouldn't be roads invented. I understand the argument. It's just it's a stupid argument. It's a stupid argument because, and again, there were roads before the car. There would be roads after the car. There were still roads. You could look up any picture. There were still roads. There's still roads. There's still roads. Still there. Still have it. It would still be. It would absolutely still be. Dumb. And by the way, I'm not calling this guy dumb. I feel bad. He's got to come up with something because he's got to make something every day. I know he doesn't believe this. I know he doesn't.
The premise of this movie is context. Not only are we living in a world where the Beatles never existed, and that doesn't make sense, as I've already established up until this point. If you're going to present us with a world that's pretty much exactly the same as the one we know today, but also, could you feasibly take all of these fantastic and great Beatles songs from the 60s and from the 70s and erase them from memory, and then fast forward time several decades later, and then just present them to people in 2018, 2019, and then all of a sudden they would catch on just the same as they would if it were the 1960s? Honestly, I think the sensation of the Beatles, part of the reason it was a sensation that happened at the time that it did, was because it happened at the time that it did. Especially if we're living in a world that without the Beatles is pretty much unchanged as this movie presents to us. A lot of the ideas and sounds and songs that are presented in this film are no longer cutting edge, or no longer refreshing. I mean, to even get a bit of a foothold, our protagonist here would most likely need to be doing trap remixes of all these great Beatles songs. It's long been said that
was not as funny as he gave it a laugh. Not as funny. And what he's saying is the Beatles music isn't the music of our time right now. I understand this argument, but the point of the movie and the point of the Beatles is you could have plunked the idea and what he's missing. And by the way, if you're a music fan, you should know this, right? Which I think he does. But again, he's just trying to do something. The idea is if you took this thing and plopped it anywhere, it would work. That's the point. Now to be like, I don't think so. All right, that's your opinion. A lot of people have opinions, and some of them are wrong sometimes. In this particular case, I disagree and think it's wrong because the point that they're trying to illustrate in a wonderful, magnificent way while presenting a protagonist who is faced with a moral dilemma of should I steal this stuff? Does, and then we see the trajectory, we see the arc, which is the whole point of a movie, is to tell us a story, so we learn something from it, is that, yes, you can put this stuff anywhere, and it would still work. That these songs, Yesterday, Strawberry Fields, are so magnificent and wonderful that they would work and be amazing at any point in time. Again, I argue, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, they were all they're all writing amazing stuff. They were all writing amazing stuff. And then the Beatles came. Right? Elvis Presley, Sinatra, right? All beautiful songs, amazing songwriting, arrangements, singing, performing, the whole 9 yards. If the Beatles didn't come in 64, if they came in 74, to me, it still works. And the case in point here is you look at Nirvana, right? A lot of people argue, I say, second biggest cultural event behind the Beatles, right? Sort of had that thing where it turned everything on its back, fashion, culture, everything, right? Got into everything. It wasn't really all that new and different from what it had come before. And for reasons that we can't explain, other than the music was just amazing. It worked. It happened. So the argument that I would say against this is it works anytime. Anytime it would work. Anytime. And that's the whole point. And you would understand that if you were really a music fan. If you were really a fan of the Beatles, you would understand that if you took Yesterday and put it anywhere at any point in time, it would still become a hit.
If artists like John Lennon or Paul McCartney, were they getting started now in the music industry, the industry wouldn't sign them in a million years. And I actually stick pretty closely to that belief.
Now he's saying, like, if Lennon and McCartney would have came along today, they wouldn't have gotten signed. Absolute craziness. Crazy talk to the umpteenth degree. Just look at all the songs that Paul has written. Rock bands, pop rock artists are still getting signed to this day. Yes, is hip hop, is country, are all these other genres becoming dominant? Absolutely. But pop's like, it's still like, we are always going to look for the good looking guy or girl who could write and sing music. Always. That's always going to be there. The strange, mysterious frontman and the unbelievable guitar play. Still going to have, it's always going to be there. So this argument of like, oh, these guys wouldn't have gotten signed if they came out in today's time.
Not only because the sounds and the talents of a McCartney or a Lennon or a Harrison aren't exactly in demand right now in the industry, but also I just don't think that the Fab Four would make all that much sense in 2019 and current marketing trends in music too. And that is my third major issue with the premise of this movie, marketing, because I think there are a lot of naive music fans that might enjoy the cute premise of this film but not really appreciate just how much marketing goes into promoting a particular artist or album or song. And
that was a smidge condescending. Some music fans with a cute premise. All right, easy with the condescension.
And that things in the music industry don't get popular simply by virtue of being good. Artists don't get tons of fans just by virtue of being talented, unfortunately. I wish it worked more that way, but it's not usually the case.
All right, now what he's saying there is actually true, because there's a lot that goes to breaking an artist, to making hits. There's a lot. You can write a great song, a phenomenal song, and you could, put it out and nobody could ever hear of you. You could never get signed. How many great bands have come and gone, like the next great thing, and then they were just some one-hit wonder. So marketing is super important, and yes, it's true. That what he's saying is true. And was it easier back when the Beatles were putting music together? Completely 1,000%, a little bit easier. In one sense of the term, is it was not as easily accessible. Some would argue that today it's even easier because you can write a great song and put it on the internet, it can catch fire, and you can become popular, which certainly has happened and will continue to happen. So you could argue that it's easier in that sense. But yes, even the Beatles, anybody who knows anything about Brian Epstein knows that he worked his rear end off to make the Beatles work. And it was particularly difficult in America at first. And if not for some of his genius moves, we may not have gotten the Beatles as we got them. It was really Brian Epstein who drove that ship and did things 1 billion% the right way, like a precise surgeon, to make sure the Beatles popped. But again, I would argue it's a movie, right? Like, you don't let stuff like that get in the way of a movie, of a great premise, of a moral story, of an arc of a character, of fun. Again, you don't sit there and go, boy, that starry sky doesn't look exactly like a starry sky. Let me make sure it's 1,000% accurate. You don't do that. It's art, it's expression. So that argument is null and void to me. Stupid. Again, I once saw a movie about a massive national tragedy, a bombing at a marathon in Boston, okay? And the lead character was an amalgamation of like 17 people. That one guy, Mark Wahlberg's character in Patriot Day, did not do all those things. That was like 6 guys. They combined them together. Why? Because the story was more important to tell than making sure all your facts were in order. Do you know what happens when you do things completely factual and make sure everything, blah, blah, blah? It gets boring and you lose people. Sometimes you have to take what they call artistic license to make a story work, to make something happen. Would it be nice if all those people got credit for, and there were 17 actors in it? Yeah, but you know what had happened? The movie probably would have never gotten financed. It would have never gotten made in the first place. It's just the reality of the situation. So to sit there and go, it's not taking into account the marketing, blah, 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 you're an idiot. Because the point is that these songs are so magical, and when the people hear them, it sort of catches this thing and it takes off, which completely, absolutely 1000% can happen. You hear a lot of bands, Mumford & Sons is the most famous. Guys grinding it out for years. All of a sudden they do one thing, boom, it takes off. So that absolutely does happen. But he's right. There is a marketing thing to the music industry that a lot of people don't know about, and it does take a while, sometimes up to 2 years for a song to become a hit. That's completely true. But again, when you're telling a story, it's a movie. First of all, I love the moral part of this of like, do I steal this material or not? Because he knows it's wrong, and you can see that struggle communicated in this trailer. You can see it. I mean, to me, like that, like, what does he do? What happens to him? What are the results? What are the consequences? That's part of the thing that makes this film so lovely. And that's what makes me interested to see it, And again, that's storytelling. And anybody that's ever been good at creating anything knows that. That's why anybody who's ever been good at creating anything wouldn't do a video like this, because it's stupid. You introduce a protagonist, something happens to that protagonist, you see the change over the course of their arc, and you find out what happens in the end. Any story from the beginning of time, starts like that. Anything, films, TV, movie, everything has that exact formula. Person, environment introduced, change, results. It's that simple. Ask any screenwriter. I've had a lot of them on this show. Great ones, some not so great ones. They all know that's the formula. And this idea and premise is so brilliant and lovely. So my response to Anthony whatever is make stuff that's genuine. Don't box yourself into a corner. Because these 3 problems you have with a movie premise from a trailer is completely crazy. Completely crazy and not founded in anything. It's nuts. It's nuts. This movie looks like it's going to be magnificent. And I'm so happy and excited for these people. I wish I owned stock in the movie. I'm pushing this thing like I own 10% of it. But I don't. But it looks magical. And I think it's going to be good. EHN, this is Ann. Who am I talking to?
Anthony, Fred from Stony Brook. How are you?
I'm doing good, Fred. How are you doing?
I was doing good. I was sitting here enjoying a cup of coffee, waiting to go into Home Depot, and then you did this entire thing with this reviewer of the movie. And now my blood is boiling, and I'm all pissed off.
Sorry.
Who is this guy? I mean, he's taking a beautiful premise and having to analyze it and tear it apart. I just don't get it. I haven't seen the movie. I'm hoping to, but this guy and everything that you said, it just seems like he's fishing for something to bitch about.
Yes.
I don't get it. I just don't. Did you ever see the movie Miracle on 34th Street where, the Santa Claus hits the guy on top of his head with his umbrella? That's what should be done to this guy. This guy he's going off the wall. I just can't imagine him tearing it apart in 3 different stages as you presented it.
Yeah.
Why? Tell me why.
And again, Miracle on 34th Street, a great example of a movie that's fun because of the premise. And it's a movie. It's fun.
It's a movie. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's a great premise. It is just fabulous. Another example of fake news. He took something, he ran with his narrative, and spun it into a way that he had to basically pour vinegar all over it. And it really burns me.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion on his entire review.
Thanks, Fred.
Let's see what the public has to say about it.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
You take care.
Later.